Christopher Whitworth Whall was an English stained glass artist who worked from the 1880s and on into the 20th century and is widely recognized as one of the key figures in the modern history of stained glass. One of Whall's best-known dictums was, "The design of the window must relate to the architecture of the frame." Early life and studies. In 1863, he was sent to Rossall School in Lancashire. The drawing master there was William Coulter of the Royal Hibernian Academy. He left Rossall School in 1865, and in 1867 enrolled as a probationer at the Royal Academy Schools. On the 8th of January 1868 he was admitted as a student there, which was incidentally a professional path taken against his parents' wishes. Career. In 1874 Whall met the designer A. H. McMurdo, founder of the Century Guild, and through him Selwyn Image, and contributed to the Guild's publication, Hobby Horse. In 1875 and 1876 he exhibited at the Royal Academy. At this time he gained the patronage of a Hanoverian, Baroness von Boeselager, who gave him funds to travel to Italy, where he was to stay for almost 3 years, traveling in central and northern Italy, studying architecture and paintings. In 1878 in Lucca he converted to Catholicism. Before going to Italy he had sought work as a portrait painter and as a studio assistant to other artists, but had had little success. When he returned to London in 1879, almost penniless, he was befriended by the Ross Minion Order of Charity at St Ethelreda's Church in Ely Place, Holborn, and became a lay member of that order. At St Ethelreda's he designed the side windows in the upper chapel, these windows being made by W. G. Saunders. By 1882 he was to leave the religious community at Ely Place, move to No. 18 Wharton Street in Clerkenwell, and work as an illustrator of newspapers, novels and children's books, as well as assisting other painters and giving drawing lessons. He carried out designs during this period for several stained glass makers including John Hardman Trading Co. Limited, as well as James Powell and Sons. Arts and crafts movement. Whall's career as an independent designer and maker of stained glass began in the late 1880s. This coincided with the emergence of the arts and crafts movement through bodies such as the Art Workers Guild and the Arts and Crafts Exhibition Society, in both of which he was active. Indeed, through James Powell and Sons he was to exhibit at that society's exhibitions at the New Gallery in 1888 and 1889. The architects with whom he was to work at Holy Trinity Church, Sloane Street, John Dando Sedding and Henry Wilson, were also prominent within the movement. It was John Dando Sedding who was to give Whall his first independent commission for the Lady Chapel east window of St Mary's Church in Stamford, Lincolnshire. Whall's participation in the early activities of the arts and crafts movement came soon after a life-changing event that had taken place in 1887. In that year he had converted the cowshed at his cottage in Dorking into a workshop, where he set about learning all the processes of the craft: cutting, painting, firing and glazing, so that, in future, no part of the making of his windows would be beyond his control. This was a direct protest against the division of labor, then almost universally prevalent among commercial manufacturers, which Whall and others saw as incompatible with the production of stained glass as an art rather than simply a trade. Work relationships. During his time at Dorking, Whall was assisted by Lewis Davis and Reginald Hallwood, both of whom were to have distinguished careers as stained glass artists. For the decade after the Walls left Dorking in 1896 he had no premises of his own for firing and glazing his stained glass, and during this period he worked closely with the firm of Lowndes and Drury, and it was in the workshops that all his windows were fabricated. Between 1897 and 1906, Lowndes and Drury was founded in 1897 by the artist Mary Lowndes and Alfred John Drury with the aim of providing independent designer craft workers with the necessary facilities to carry out the stained glass commissions. At various times, particularly in the 1880s and 1890s, Wall was commissioned to design windows by James Powell and Sons, Wall and Amp Wall. In 1922, in conjunction with his daughter Veronica, he formed the company of Wall and Amp Wall Limited, which carried on long after his death. There are two windows in St. Peter's Church in Swinton, near Manchester, which Claire Hartwell and Nicolaus Pevsner attribute to Wall and Wall in the volume The Buildings of England, Lancashire, Manchester and the South East. They describe the windows, which are situated at the west end of the north aisle, as having beautifully drawn figures on a pale ground, stained glass. Wall was also influential as a teacher, running stained glass classes at the Central School of Arts and Crafts in 1896, and in 1898 at the Royal College of Art in London, where students were encouraged to relate design to architecture. He was elected to the Art Workers Guild in 1889 and served as master in 1912. He participated in the Ghent International Exhibition in 1912 and in Paris in 1914. His work was shown at the Royal Academy's Arts and Crafts Exhibition of 1916. His pupils and colleagues included his daughter Veronica Wall. A good example of his daughter's work is her window in the Lady Chapel of Our Lady of Grace and St. Teresa of Avila Church in Chingford, London. Described in The Buildings of England, London 5 East by Bridget Cherry, Charles O'Brien and Nicolaus Pevsner. ISBN 0-300-10701-3 as Subtle Lady Chapel Window of 1939. Delicate figure of Virgin and Child, largely white against a band of blue, intricately leaded. The move to Ravenscourt Park. In 1907, Wall took over the furniture-making workshops at 1 Ravenscourt Park, Hammersmith, formerly used by his friend Charles Spooner, the architect. Spooner converted the upper floor into a cartooning and glass painting studio, complete with tall windows, and the lower floor into a fully equipped workshop with a kiln, glass racks and glazing bench. Stained glass work. Wall's book on his craft. Wall expounded his philosophy of craftsmanship in his book, Stained Glass Work, published in London by John Hogg in 1905. Some artists influenced by Wall. Although there is no record of Wall having undertaken commissions in Ireland, except for Lochria Cathedral, it does seem that he can be linked to the early 20th century stained glass revival in that country. The artist Wilhelmina Geddes was certainly influenced by Wall. Geddes was the artist who created the work The Crucifixion in St. Luke's Church in Wallsend. It was in September 1901 that Alfred Ernest Child arrived in Dublin to take up the post of instructor in stained glass at the newly reorganized Dublin Metropolitan School of Art, and it seems that Wall was one of those who were behind this appointment, along with the painter Sarah Purser, the poet W.B. Yeats and Edward Martin, the art critic. Child had been trained by Wall and would try to bring Wall's principles to a new generation of Irish artists. Child and his artist friends aimed to set up a workshop similar to that formed by Mary Lowndes and Alfred Drury in London, and in 1903 Sarah Purser set up the Tower of Glass. Somewhat further afield, it was Ralph Adams Cram, the architect, who introduced Wall's work to the United States in the period 1906 to 1910. This at All Saints Sashmont, Boston, and Boston's Church of the Advent. For the Church of the Advent, Wall completed 5 windows depicting the 5 regions of the early Church, starting with the first window on the east end of the south nave wall with St. Ignatius of Antioch representing the Syrian Church and west of that St. Athanasius representing the African Church. On the north side, starting at the west end, is St. Ambrose of Milan for the Latin Church, then St. Chrysostom for the Greek Church, and finally St. Columba, symbolizing the Celtic Church. Personal life. When his father died in 1874, Wall moved with his mother to No. 4 Hyde Side, Edmonton. He married Florence M. Chaplin on the 10th of November 1884. In 1884 the family moved from London to Stonebridge, near Dorking, where they kept a small holding with a cow, a pig and some chickens. The 5 children were born between 1885 and 1894. Christopher John was born in 1885, and the daughter Veronica in 1887. The other children were Hugh Bernard, Audrey and Lewis.